Part 1. The Return. The road into Ravenhurst was lonelier than I remembered. 10 years away from the town should have softened its edges, dulled the memories. But instead, every curve of the cracked asphalt carried with it a weight that pressed against my chest. The trees leaned closer to the road now, their skeletal branches arching like ribs over a decaying body. It was late autumn, the skies swollen with grey clouds, and a thin mist curled over the asphalt like something alive. Ravenhurst had never been a kind place. Even as a boy, I had felt its silence like a second skin, a silence not of peace but of secrets. People whispered in half words, eyes darting at shadows, and conversations ended when children entered the room. Adults carried fear in their posture, but they never named it. I left after high school, swearing never to return. But blood, it seems, has its own pull. The call had come 2 weeks ago. My childhood friend, Thomas Rourke, had gone missing. He wasn't the first. Over the past 6 months, 5 townspeople had vanished without a trace. The police offered no answers, only warnings about staying indoors at night. The town's local paper barely mentioned the disappearances beyond a paragraph or 2, as though refusing to speak of them might erase them from reality. But Thomas wasn't just anyone. He had been my anchor, my brother in every way but blood. And when his sister Mara begged me to come back, something in me knew I couldn't ignore it. The welcome sign creaked as I passed it. Welcome to Ravenhurst, where history lives. The paint was chipped, the slogan a cruel joke. The town itself hadn't changed much. Rows of brick buildings sagged with age, their windows shuttered. The main street held fewer cars, fewer lights, fewer people. It felt abandoned, though I could sense eyes watching from behind lace curtains. I drove to the Rourke house first. Mara opened the door before I could knock. She looked older than her 30 years, the lines around her eyes sharper, her hair streaked with grey. But her embrace was strong, desperate, as if she feared I might vanish like Thomas if she let go. "You came," she whispered. I had to. Inside, the house smelled faintly of dust and lavender. Family photographs lined the walls, but the recent ones had a gap, no Thomas. His absence screamed louder than any portrait could. Mara sat me down, her hands trembling around a chipped mug of tea. "The police won't help. They say he probably left town on his own, but Thomas would never do that. He wouldn't leave, me here alone." I nodded. "Tell me everything." She told me about the night he disappeared, how Thomas had been obsessed with the old asylum on the outskirts of town, the infamous Ravenhurst Asylum. It had been closed for decades after a scandal involving patient abuse, but rumours never died. People spoke of experiments, rituals, patients who screamed about voices in the walls. Thomas had always been curious, too curious about those stories. Mara said he'd been sneaking out to the asylum at night, claiming he was close to uncovering something. The last night she saw him, he left with a notebook in hand. He never returned. A cold knot twisted in my stomach. The asylum still. "Standing?" I asked. She nodded. "Barely. They tried demolishing it once, but the contractors stopped. Said their machines kept breaking. Accidents kept happening. No one goes near it anymore. Except Thomas, I thought, and maybe now me." That night, Mara let me stay in the spare room. Sleep didn't come easily. The house creaked with old age. The wind whispered through cracks in the windows. At around 2 a.m, I thought I heard something else. Faint, almost imperceptible. A whisper. Not the shifting of wood, not the wind. A voice, low, stretched, calling my name. I sat up, heart pounding. The room was empty, shadows stretching long against the walls. I told myself it was exhaustion, a trick of memory, but the sound had been clear, and it had come from the direction of the asylum. The next morning, I walked the edges of town. The air was sharp, carrying the scent of rain-soaked earth. People recognized me, Some offered hesitant nods. Others turned away quickly. A few muttered things under their breath. Outsider. Stranger. Traitor. I'd left after all. At the corner store, I ran into Sheriff Caldwell. He was a heavy-set man with thinning hair and eyes that never seemed to focus on yours for long. When I asked about Thomas, his expression hardened. "We're doing everything we can," he said flatly. "But sometimes people leave. Sometimes they don't want to be found." I narrowed my eyes. Thomas isn't like that. He gave a shrug that ended the conversation. It was the same shrug I'd seen him give years ago when another child had gone missing. Back then, the boy was found dead weeks later in the woods, but no one had been charged. Caldwell had always been good at closing cases without solving them. By evening, I found myself driving toward the asylum. The building rose against the horizon, like a wound in the earth. Its stone walls were cracked, windows shattered, ivy crawling like veins across its face. The front gates hung crooked on rusted hinges. The air around it felt different, thicker, heavier, as if the world itself didn't want me there. I parked the car and stepped out. The silence was overwhelming. Not even birds sang in the trees. Inside, the asylum was worse. The air smelled of mildew and rust, and every step echoed through endless corridors. Paint peeled from the walls in long strips, revealing words scratched into the plaster beneath. Words repeated over and over. "They are listening." My flashlight beam danced across overturned wheelchairs, broken gurneys, and doors that led into darkness. And then, in one of the rooms, I found it. A notebook. Thomas's handwriting. The first. Pages were filled with his neat notes, dates, names, diagrams of the asylum's layout. But the further I flipped, the more frantic the writing became. Scribbles, circles, words repeated until the ink tore holes through the paper. Phrases like, "The walls breathe. The voices are real. They know my name." My hands trembled. Then I heard it again, a whisper. This time it wasn't distant. It was right behind me. I spun around, flashlight trembling in my grip. The beam fell on empty space, just a crumbling wall and broken glass. But the whisper came again, my name, stretched thin like a rope pulled to snapping. I stumbled back, heart hammering. The notebook clutched tight against my chest, and for a split second, I saw him, Thomas, standing at the end of the hallway, pale, eyes wide, lips moving soundlessly. I blinked, and he was gone. The air turned icy, and the whisper that followed was no longer his voice. It was a chorus. Hundreds of voices rising from the walls, overlapping, suffocating, and they all knew my name. Part 2. The First Body. The morning after my visit to the asylum, I woke with a pounding head and the weight of Thomas's notebook pressed under my pillow like a talisman. Mara was already in the kitchen, staring blankly into a cup of untouched coffee. Her eyes snapped to me the moment I entered. "You went there, didn't you?" she asked, voice low, almost accusing. I hesitated, then nodded. "I found this." I slid the notebook onto the table. Her hands trembled as she opened it. The moment her eyes caught the jagged handwriting, her breath hitched. "He was really in that place. He wrote about hearing voices," I said carefully. "About something watching him," Mara shook her head. "He's not crazy. Thomas wouldn't imagine things." Before I could answer, the phone rang. The sound sliced through the kitchen like a blade. Mara jumped, nearly spilling her coffee. She answered, listened for a moment, then turned pale. "It's Sheriff Caldwell," she whispered, holding the receiver against her chest. "They've found a body." The town gathered at the edge of Ravenhurst woods, whispers rolling through the crowd like a storm. Caldwell's deputies held the line, but no one wanted to be close. Fear had a smell. Sharp, metallic, like blood on iron, and I could taste it in the air. The body lay in a clearing, covered hastily with a sheet. Caldwell stood nearby, face hard, sweat gleaming on his brow despite the cool morning. When the sheet was lifted, gasps rippled through the onlookers. The victim was a man, though his features were nearly unrecognizable. His body was mutilated, not torn apart by animals, but arranged, deliberately. His arms were stretched wide, pinned with sharpened branches, his chest carved with symbols I didn't understand. Circles within circles, lines intersecting like constellations. Caldwell barked at the crowd to disperse, but I forced my way closer. One of the deputies tried to stop me, but Caldwell raised a hand. His eyes met mine with something between warning and resignation. "You shouldn't be here, boy," he muttered. "Who is he?" Caldwell exhaled through his nose. "Name's Edward Mallory. Worked at the mill. Disappeared 3 weeks ago. Another one of the missing. Another one returned, but not alive." I crouched near the body. The symbols on his chest seemed almost familiar. My mind reached for a memory, something half buried in childhood nightmares. Then I remembered Thomas's notebook. Flipping quickly through the pages, I found them, drawn in frantic ink, the same patterns. Caldwell's eyes narrowed. "Where'd you get that?" "Thomas's notes," I said, standing tall. "He was onto something, wasn't he?" Caldwell's jaw tightened. "Leave it alone. You hear me? This isn't your fight." But it was. Every nerve in my body told me it was. That night, I returned to the notebook. Under the dim light of Mara's lamp, the symbols seemed to move on the page, bending, shifting, aligning into words I almost recognized. My head throbbed as I traced the lines with my finger. And then I saw it, scrawled in the margin beside one of the symbols. Sacrifice. They listen through the dead. My stomach turned. The house was quiet. Too quiet. Mara had gone to bed hours ago, but as I closed the notebook, I noticed something that made my blood run cold. The lamp flickered. Once, twice, and then, in the corner of the room, the shadows thickened. A figure stood there, silent, unmoving. My breath caught in my throat. It wore a mask. White porcelain, featureless except for 2 hollow black eyes. The figure didn't move, didn't breathe, just stood, watching. I stumbled back, knocking the chair over. The sound seemed to break the spell, because in the blink of an eye, the corner was empty, but the notebook lay open again on the floor. Pages I hadn't turned fluttered, as though a wind moved through them. On the last page, in fresh ink, words sprawled across the paper. "You are next." I barely slept. By morning, Mara noticed the dark circles under my eyes. I didn't tell her about the figure. I didn't want her fear to spiral. Instead, I drove back into town, notebook tucked under my jacket. At the library, dust thick as ash clung to the shelves. Miss Evelyn, the librarian who had been ancient, even when I was a boy, gave me a wary smile. "You've come back to chase ghosts," she murmured as I laid the notebook on the counter. "You know these symbols?" I asked, showing her the pages. Her smile faded. "You shouldn't carry those with you. They invite attention." "Whose attention?" "Theirs." Her voice dropped to a whisper. "The ones who whisper beneath the walls. The asylum was built on ground that was never clean. Some say it was cursed land, others that men brought the curse with them. Either way, the voices never left." Her eyes shifted toward the tall windows, as if expecting to see someone listening. I swallowed hard. "What do they want?" She closed the notebook with trembling hands. "They want to be remembered. They want to be heard. And they will use anyone who listens too closely." That evening, a storm rolled over Ravenhurst. Rain lashed the windows. Thunder shook the walls. Mara sat curled on the couch, but I paced, restless, my mind tangled in the notebook's warnings. Around midnight, a knock sounded at the door. Not polite, urgent. I opened it to find Sheriff Caldwell, drenched in rain, face grim. "Another body," he said simply. The second body was worse than the first. A young woman this time, strung up in the churchyard like a grotesque marionette. Her chest bore the same symbols, deeper, bloodier, and around her neck hung a chain with a locket, one I recognized instantly. Thomas had given it to his mother years ago. Mara's voice cracked when she saw it. It's his. The implication settled over us like a shroud. Whoever had killed her wanted us to know Thomas was connected, or to believe he was. As I stared at the symbols carved into her flesh, the thunder above seemed to echo them, each boom a whisper in my ear, and for the first time, I felt it not just in my head, but in my bones. The voices, calling, waiting. And this time, they weren't whispering my name, they were whispering Thomas's. The rain never stopped that night. Sheets of water turned the town into a maze of reflections, streetlights bleeding across slick pavement. Sheriff Caldwell ordered the body removed quickly, his voice sharper than usual. But the damage was done. Word spread fast, and fear spread faster. By dawn, Ravenhurst felt smaller, more suffocating. Mara refused to leave her room. I heard her, crying through the thin walls, muffled sobs that made me feel like an intruder in her grief. I wanted to comfort her, but I couldn't bring myself to knock. Instead, I sat at the kitchen table, Thomas's notebook open before me like a curse I couldn't put down. The symbols, the drawings, the words, they are listening. Sacrifice. The voices are real. The more I stared at them, the more I thought. I saw shapes emerging between the lines. Faces, maybe, or masks. I slammed the book shut, my pulse hammering in my temples. That's when I noticed something else. The pages weren't all the same age. Most were yellowed, smudged with Thomas's handwriting, but tucked between them, near the back, was a single sheet of pristine paper. On it, written in a hand that wasn't Thomas's, were the words, "We see you." I went back to the asylum. It was madness, I knew. But the notebook pulled me there, like a magnet, dragging me into its orbit no matter how much I resisted. The storm had passed, leaving the air damp and heavy. The asylum loomed ahead, blackened stone glistening in the wet light. As I crossed the threshold, the silence was absolute. My footsteps echoed like intrusions. I retraced my path from before, the long corridor, the carved walls, the room where I'd found the notebook. But this time, something was different. The air smelled faintly of copper. Blood. And then I saw it. On the wall opposite the notebook's hiding place, new words had been scratched into the plaster. Fresh gouges, the dust still loose on the floor. Beneath them, "Leave now." The letters dripped red. I reached out with trembling fingers, touched the grooves. The color smeared across my skin. Wet. Not paint, not rust. Blood. My stomach lurched. I staggered back, nearly tripping over debris. That's when I heard the sound. Footsteps. Slow, deliberate, somewhere deeper in the asylum. Thomas? The word left my lips before I could stop it. A desperate hope. But the footsteps didn't answer. They only grew louder, closer. I turned, flashlight trembling in my grip, and caught sight of movement at the end of the hall. A shadow slipping around the corner. "Wait!" I called, chasing it. The corridor twisted, split into branching hallways. My light caught only glimpses, an elbow vanishing, a heel disappearing. Whoever it was, they were leading me deeper into the asylum. I followed, breath ragged, the walls closing in. At last I stumbled into a large chamber. My light swept across rows of overturned hospital beds, rusted restraints dangling like broken chains. And there, in the center, was the shadowed figure. The mask again. White, expressionless, watching me. "Who are you?" My voice cracked against the silence. The figure tilted its head, slowly, like a predator considering its prey. I took a step forward, and the flashlight went out. Pitch black swallowed me whole. I fumbled with the switch, heart slamming against my ribs, panic clawing at my throat. When the light finally flickered back to life, the room was empty, but the mask remained. On the floor, inches from my feet. I didn't remember leaving the asylum. One moment I was staring at that mask. The next, I was standing outside in the cold, drizzle, gasping for breath as though I'd been underwater. My clothes clung to my skin, soaked through, though I couldn't recall stepping into the rain. I drove back to Mara's in silence. The mask burned into my vision. White, hollow-eyed, watching. When I stumbled inside, Mara was waiting in the living room, pale and frantic. "Where were you?" she demanded. "Do you know what time it is?" I checked the clock. Nearly 3 a.m. I had no memory of hours passing. My voice faltered. I couldn't tell her the truth. Not all of it. "I was at the asylum." Her expression collapsed into fear. "You can't keep going there. It's not safe. Thomas was obsessed. And now he's gone. Do you want to end up the same?" Her words struck harder than she knew. Because deep down, I already felt it. The asylum had its hooks in me, just as it had in Thomas. The next day brought another discovery. Caldwell came to the house, his expression darker than before. He didn't sit, didn't remove his hat. "We found something near the churchyard," he said gruffly. "Thought you should see it." He handed me a sealed evidence bag. Inside was a fragment of torn paper, Thomas's handwriting. The note read, "The truth is beneath. Don't trust them." "Where exactly did you find this?" I asked. Caldwell's jaw worked. "Near the body," Mara gasped, covering her mouth. I stared at the paper until my vision blurred. "The truth is beneath." Beneath what? The church? The asylum? The town itself? And who was Thomas warning me not to trust? That night, I dreamed. I was a child again, wandering the halls of Ravenhurst Asylum. My small hand brushed the cold walls, tracing grooves I couldn't yet read. Voices called from the rooms around me. Screams, sobs, laughter. And then, at the end of the corridor, I saw myself. Not a child, not grown, something in between. My double turned, face pale, eyes black as the void. "You've always belonged." "Here," it whispered. I woke drenched in sweat. My sheets twisted around me like restraints. And on the nightstand beside my bed lay the mask. The mask sat on my nightstand as though it had always been there, white, smooth, hollow-eyed. My chest seized with panic. I hadn't brought it inside. I remembered leaving it on the asylum floor, yet here it was, waiting for me like a gift or a threat. I didn't touch it, couldn't. Every instinct screamed that it was wrong, that it wasn't an object so much as an invitation. By dawn, I carried it outside, wrapped in an old towel, and buried it beneath the gnarled oak tree behind Mara's house. Each shovel of dirt felt like I was hiding evidence of my own madness. But even after the earth was smoothed over, I swore I could still feel its empty gaze through the soil. Her words landed heavy, but they couldn't drown out the pull of the notebook. I opened it again that afternoon, flipping past the frantic scribbles, past the warnings. At the very back, beneath the final page, I discovered something I hadn't noticed before. A folded scrap of paper, brittle with age. It wasn't Thomas's handwriting. The ink was faded, the letters looping in a style decades old. "The first body is never the last. They come in threes, each a door, each a key." I stared at the words until they blurred. 3. That meant another death was coming, and I was powerless to stop it. The town buzzed with fear as rumours spread. Some said Thomas had joined a cult. Others whispered that the asylum patients had cursed the land before they died. Children weren't allowed outside after dark. Shops closed early, doors barred against the unseen. I wandered Main Street, notebook, hidden under my coat, trying to piece together fragments of sense. That's when I noticed Miss Evelyn, the librarian, standing in the shadow of the church. She beckoned me over with a frail hand. "You've read too much already," she murmured when I approached. Her eyes darted toward the steeple, then back to me. "The asylum is only the surface. The real truth lies beneath." Her words echoed Thomas's note. "The truth is beneath." "What's beneath?" I demanded. Her mouth opened, closed, as though she wrestled with words too heavy to speak. Finally, she whispered, "Not all graves are marked." Then she turned, hurrying inside the church before I could press her further. The bells tolled, a sound that reverberated through my skull like a warning. That night, I set the notebook aside and tried to rest. But at 2 a.m., I woke to scratching. Soft, at first, then louder. From beneath the floorboards, I swung my legs out of bed, heart hammering. The scratching grew frantic, desperate, like nails clawing upward. I knelt, pressing my ear to the floor, and I heard it, a voice, faint, raspy, calling my name. I stumbled back, breath caught in my throat. The sound stopped, leaving only silence, thick and oppressive. Then, from the hallway, Mara screamed. I tore out of the room, nearly tripping over the rug. Her bedroom door stood wide open, curtains whipping in the night wind from a shattered window. She stood in the center of the room, trembling, pointing. "There," she whispered, voice shaking. Outside, across the yard, beneath the oak tree where I'd buried the mask, someone stood, tall, still, watching. The white mask gleamed in the moonlight. I ran outside barefoot, the grass wet with dew. But when I reached the oak, the figure was gone. The earth where I'd buried the mask had been disturbed, clawed open from within. The towel lay shredded in the dirt, the hole yawning empty. The mask was gone. The next day, Caldwell came again. His face was pale, his usual bluster hollowed out. He didn't come inside this time. He simply stood on the porch, hat clutched in. His hands. "There's been another one," he said. My stomach turned cold. "The third?" He nodded. "A boy this time, barely 16. Mara let out a sob behind me. Caldwell's eyes met mine, hard and resigned. "You were right. This isn't random. And if Thomas is alive, he's at the center of it." I thought of the notebook, of the words scratched in blood on the asylum wall, of the mask clawing its way back from the earth. And for the first time, I admitted what I had been afraid to believe. Thomas wasn't just missing, he was part of whatever was happening in Ravenhurst, and the bodies were only the beginning. Part 3. Layers of Lies. The morning after the third body was found, Ravenhurst felt as though it had slipped deeper, into shadow. The air itself seemed heavier, pressing down on the streets, on the people, on me. Every conversation in town was carried in whispers, cut short whenever footsteps approached. At the diner, the smell of grease and burnt coffee clung to the air, but the usual chatter was gone. Instead, silence ruled, punctuated only by the clink of silverware. When I walked in, heads turned. Some faces held pity, others suspicion. They all knew I was Thomas's friend. They all knew he was missing. And now, with every new death, suspicion coiled tighter around his name. And by extension, mine. I slid into a booth and ordered black coffee. The waitress, Agnes, an older woman who had watched me grow up, leaned in as she poured. "You should leave," she whispered. I frowned. "Why?" Her eyes darted to the other tables. "People are scared. They don't think the police can stop this. They think whoever's doing it is one of us." "One of us?" I repeated. She nodded, her lips trembling. "The mask, the symbols. That's old business. Things we don't talk about. But it started here, and it'll end here. You'd be smart to get out while you still can." I wanted to ask more, but her hand shook as she set down the pot and she turned quickly away. Layers of lies. That's what it was. The whole town living under a quilt of silence, stitched from fear and secrets. And Thomas, had torn through one of those stitches. Now I was doing the same. Back at Mara's, the notebook called to me again. I resisted at first, pacing the room, but its presence was like gravity. At last, I opened it, flipping through frantic scrawls until I found a section I hadn't noticed before. Sketches, dozens of them. Faces, distorted, mask-like, with hollow eyes and open mouths. Some looked human, others didn't. Beneath them, in jagged script, they wear us. They wear us until nothing is left. A chill crawled down my spine. That's when the phone rang. I snatched it up, heart pounding. "Hello!" Static crackled on the line. A faint hiss. Then, beneath it, a whisper. Not Mara's voice, not Caldwell's, not anyone I knew. "Come back to us." I froze. "Thomas!" The line went dead. I didn't tell Mara. She was already fraying, her hands shaking whenever the wind rattled the windows. Instead, I drove straight to the sheriff's office. Caldwell was at his desk, a cigarette smouldering in the ashtray, papers stacked high around him. "You've been holding back," I said, slamming the notebook onto his desk. His eyes flicked to it, then to me. "Watch yourself. These symbols, these rituals, you've seen them before, haven't you?" For a moment, silence stretched between us. Then Caldwell sighed, grinding the cigarette into the tray. "When I was a boy, there were stories. Folks said the asylum wasn't just for the sick, it was for the damned. Priests, scholars, even men from the government came here, looking for ways to speak with the other side." I stared at him. "The other side of what?" He looked up, eyes hollow. "The veil, life and death. They said the walls of the asylum were thin, too thin, and something slipped through." His words chilled me. "You think that's what's happening now?" Caldwell shook his head. "I don't know what I think, but I know this. Every time people start digging, blood follows. And if Thomas went too deep," he didn't finish. He didn't have to. That night, I returned to the asylum. The gates groaned as I pushed them open, the hinges screaming in protest. The air was colder there, damp with the smell of stone and rot. My flashlight beam cut through the dark, revealing corridors that seemed longer than before, as though the building shifted when unobserved. I found myself in the records room. Dusty cabinets lined the walls, drawers half open, papers spilling across the floor. I rifled through them, hands shaking, until one file stopped me cold. "Patient, Thomas Rourke." My breath caught. I yanked the file open. Inside were photographs, grainy, black and white shots of children, some strapped to chairs, others staring blankly at the camera. And in one, unmistakably, was Thomas. No older than 8, eyes wide with terror. I staggered back. How was that possible? Thomas had never spoken of this. Mara never mentioned it. I flipped further and froze. Another photograph, this time of me. A child, maybe 7 years old, pale, thin, sitting in a cold metal chair inside the asylum. The paper slipped from my hands. "No," I whispered. "That's not possible." But it was. The evidence stared back at me. The asylum wasn't just a place of rumors. It had touched me, shaped me, and I hadn't remembered until now. The whispers rose then, louder than ever, curling from the walls, seeping from the cracks in the floor. "You were ours," they hissed. I bolted, running blind through twisting corridors, the voices chasing me like smoke. At last, I stumbled into the open air, collapsing against the cold grass outside. My hands shook as I stared at the photograph still clutched in my grip. My own young face stared back at me, empty-eyed, a stranger I didn't remember being. Layers of lies, the town, the asylum, my own life. Everything was built on them, and now the lies were unraveling. I returned to Mara in silence, unable to tell her what I'd seen. How could I? How could I explain that her brother and I had both been part of something buried so deep even memory had been stolen? But as I tried to sleep, the voices returned. Not faint this time, not distant. Close, inside the walls, whispering my name over and over until it filled the room. And when I opened my eyes, I wasn't alone. The mask lay on my pillow, and beside it, written in the dust of the nightstand with a trembling finger, "You belong to us." Part 4, the breaking point. I didn't touch the mask, couldn't. It lay on my pillow like a lover's offering, patient and inevitable. The hollow eyes stared at me, unblinking, reflecting only my own fear. I swept it to the floor, heart hammering, but it landed without a sound. Not a thud, not a scrape, just silence. And somehow that was worse. Mara burst into the room, her face pale. What was that noise? I shook my head quickly, shoving the mask beneath the bed with my foot. Nothing, just drop something. Her eyes lingered on me too long, suspicion forming, but she didn't press. The sheriff's here. He says there's something you need to see. I followed her to the living room. Caldwell stood in the doorway, hat in hand, his weathered face drawn tight. He didn't look like a man anymore. He looked like an apology waiting to be spoken. They found something, he said. His voice was hoarse. Down by the river. We drove in silence, the gravel crunching beneath the tires. The river was swollen with rain, its banks muddy and treacherous. A small crowd had gathered, townsfolk clutching coats against the cold. At the edge, under a tarp, lay another body. I braced myself, but when the sheet was pulled back, the air left my lungs. It wasn't a stranger, it was Miss Evelyn, the librarian. Her eyes were gone, sockets hollow, and carved into her chest, in jagged lines, was the same symbol from the asylum wall. Mara gasped, clinging to me for support. Caldwell swore under his breath. She knew something. She tried to tell you. I swallowed hard, bile rising in my throat. She had whispered to me about graves, about truth lying beneath. And now she was beneath the earth herself. The whispers were claiming anyone who spoke. That night, Mara locked every window, every door. She paced the house like a caged bird, muttering prayers under her breath. First Thomas, then the others, now Evelyn. Her voice cracked. It won't stop. It's in the town, in the air, in us. Can't you feel it? I wanted to deny it, but I could feel it. Every shadow seemed to breathe. Every silence felt crowded. Mara, I said carefully, there's something you don't know. About Thomas. About me. Her eyes snapped to mine. What? I hesitated. How could I tell her that both her brother and I had been patients in that place? That photographs existed to prove it? That our lives weren't what we thought they were? Before I could speak, the lights flickered. Once. Twice. Then the house plunged into darkness. Mara screamed. I fumbled for a flashlight, its beams slicing through the black. The living room was empty. The hallway stretched ahead, walls breathing with shadows. And then I heard it. The scratching. Not beneath the floor this time. Inside the walls. Closer. Faster. Mara clutched my arm. It's in here. I raised the flashlight, following the sound, until I stopped at the far wall. The wallpaper was peeling, the plaster cracked. The scratching grew frantic, as though something was desperate to get out. I reached for the loose panel, hand trembling, and pried it back. A cavity yawned behind the wall, and inside, huddled in the dark, was a figure. For one dizzying moment, I thought it was Thomas. But as the figure lifted its head, I saw the truth. It was me, or something that looked like me. Its skin was pale, waxen. Its eyes were hollow pits, lips stretched in a grin too wide, too sharp. Finally, it whispered. I stumbled back, flashlight shaking. Mara screamed again, pulling me away. The thing crawled forward, but the moment it touched the light, it shrieked, recoiling into the dark cavity. I slammed the panel shut, chest heaving. "What the hell was that?" Mara cried. I couldn't answer. My throat was dry, words lost. Because I knew what it was. A piece of me. The asylum hadn't just taken memories. It had taken pieces of us, and now those pieces were coming back. Caldwell didn't believe me when I told him. He stared at me across his cluttered desk, shaking his head. "You're seeing things. Stress, lack of sleep. I'm not making this up." I slammed the photograph of myself onto the desk. "Look, I was there. Just like Thomas. We were both patients, and they did something to us." Caldwell studied the photo, jaw tightening. "Where did you find this?" "In the asylum." For a long moment, he said nothing. Then he leaned back, exhaling smoke from a fresh cigarette. "I warned you about digging," he muttered. "But now you've dug too far." "What does that mean?" I demanded. He didn't answer. Instead, he opened a drawer, pulled out a thick file and tossed it across the desk. I opened it and froze. Dozens of names, dates, photographs, children, adults, families, all patients, all from Ravenhurst. And beside many of the names, a single word was scrawled in red ink: missing. Caldwell's voice was low. "This town was built on that place. Our grandparents, our parents, they all knew. They let it happen. And when it got too dangerous, they buried it. Literally. But you can't bury something like that forever." I flipped through the file, my hands trembling, and then I saw it. Mara's name, listed as an admitted patient, age 6. My stomach dropped. Caldwell saw the look on my face and snatched the file back. "Don't tell her. If she doesn't remember, let her keep it that way. Some truths will break her." But it was too late. Because I knew. And if Mara's past was tied to the asylum too, then none of us had ever escaped. That night, Mara found me staring at the photograph of myself again. "What aren't you telling me?" she asked, softly. I looked at her, at the fear in her eyes, at the cracks forming in her strength. "I think we were all part of it," I whispered. "You, me, Thomas. The asylum wasn't just for strangers, it was for us." She shook her head violently. No, I'd remember." "Would you?" I pressed. "I didn't, not until now. And Thomas, he remembered enough to go back." Her face crumpled, tears spilling. "Why us? Why our family?" I didn't answer, because I didn't know. The house groaned then, the walls trembling. The lights flickered again, and from the hallway, a voice whispered, not mine, not Mara's, but Thomas's. "Come home." I raced into the hall, flashlight, beam cutting through the dark. The voice echoed, slipping from room to room, impossible to pin down. "Come home," it repeated, softer now, coaxing. I reached the front door, yanked it open. Cold night air rushed in, carrying with it the faintest sound of laughter. And there, at the edge of the yard, stood Thomas, alive. He wore the mask. The white face gleamed in the moonlight, hollow eyes fixed on me. "Brother," he said, his voice distorted, layered, more than human. "You finally see." Mara clutched my arm, trembling. "Thomas?" But he was already turning, stepping back into the shadows of the trees. "Come home," he repeated. Then he was gone. I didn't sleep that night. Neither did Mara. We sat in silence, the weight of what we'd seen crushing us. Thomas was alive, but he wasn't Thomas anymore, and whatever he had become, he wanted us to join him. The asylum hadn't finished its work. It was calling us back. Part 5. The Descent. The next morning, Ravenhurst woke to fog so thick it swallowed the town whole. The streets were gone, the houses blurred, the church steeple reduced to a pale silhouette in the mist. It felt less like weather and more like the town itself had been smothered. Mara sat at the table, staring into her untouched tea. She hadn't spoken since we saw Thomas in the yard. Her silence was louder than words, a wall I couldn't breach. I wanted to tell her it wasn't him, that the mask, the voice, the thing in the woods, it was something wearing her brother's shape. But a part of me knew that was only half true. Thomas was in there, somewhere, and whatever had claimed him wanted us next. Caldwell arrived just after sunrise, knocking heavy on the door. His face was grey, eyes bloodshot. "Another one," he said. The words felt like nails in my chest. We followed him to the outskirts of town, where the fog clung low to the earth. A barn stood there, half collapsed, its roof sagging. Inside, the body dangled from a beam, swaying gently. A young man, barely older than Thomas. His hands were bound, his chest carved with symbols, and nailed above his head was the mask, not the one I'd buried, not the one Thomas wore. Another, identical. Caldwell's jaw tightened. "It's spreading." I stared at the mask, bile rising in my throat. "How many are there?" He shook his head. "Too many." Mara turned away, her shoulders shaking. I wanted to comfort her, but I couldn't move. My eyes were locked on the mask, its hollow gaze pulling me in. For a moment, I thought I heard laughter inside my skull. When I finally looked down, the young man's eyes were open, staring at me. I staggered back, heart pounding. But when Caldwell glanced my way, the eyes were shut again. Dead. That night, I made a decision. I couldn't keep circling the edges of the truth. I had to go back to the asylum. Not to search this time, not to wander the halls, but to descend. Because beneath the asylum lay something deeper. Evelyn's words returned to me. Not all graves are marked. I packed a flashlight, rope, and matches. Mara tried to stop me, grabbing my arm, her eyes wide with desperation. "If you go back there, you won't come out," she whispered. I cupped her face in my hands. "If I don't go, none of us will survive." "You know that." Tears slipped down her cheeks. "Then I'm coming with you." I wanted to refuse, to tell her it was too dangerous, but I saw the fire in her eyes, the same fire that had kept her alive all these years. She wasn't a bystander, not anymore. So we went together. The asylum loomed in the fog like a skeleton, its windows empty sockets, its roof broken ribs. Inside, the air was colder than before, thick with mildew and whispers. We made our way to the basement, where rusted pipes wept water down the walls. The floor was cracked, uneven. At the far end, a grate yawned, its bars rusted through. Behind it, stairs spiraled downward into darkness. "This wasn't on the maps," I muttered. Mara's hand found mine. "Because it wasn't meant to be." We pried the grate open, metal shrieking, and descended. The air grew colder with each step. The whispers louder. My flashlight trembled in my hand, the beam quivering across damp stone walls etched with symbols. Some fresh, some so old the stone itself seemed scarred. At the bottom, the stairs opened into a cavern. And there it was, an underground chapel. Rows of crumbling pews faced an altar of black stone. Candles guttered in the damp air, though no one had lit them. Symbols were carved into every surface, walls, floor, ceiling, and at the center, nailed to the altar, was a mask larger than any we had seen. Its face stretched wide, its mouth open, in a scream that seemed to echo even in silence. Mara gasped, clutching my arm. "God!" I stepped closer, my breath shallow. The mask's hollow eyes seemed to follow me, pulling me in. And then, "Brother!" The voice froze me. I turned. Thomas stood in the doorway of the chapel, the mask covering his face, his body draped in robes that looked stitched from shadows. His hands were pale, trembling, but his voice was steady. "You finally came home." Mara cried out, "Thomas, take it off! Please, come back. He tilted his head, the mask gleaming. I can't. It's not mine to take. It never was. I stepped forward, fists clenched. What did they do to us? Why are we here? Thomas laughed, softly, a sound that didn't belong to him. They opened the door. We were the keys. And now, the door will never close. He raised his hands. The candles flared, their flames twisting into shapes. Faces, screaming, writhing. The walls pulsed, the symbols glowing faintly red. Mara clutched me, trembling. We have to leave. But the exit was gone. Where the doorway had been was now only stone. Thomas stepped closer, the mask's hollow eyes inches from mine. His voice dropped to a whisper. You can't run from what you are. Then he pressed something into my hand. Cold. Smooth. Another mask. Identical. I dropped it as though it burned, but it clung to my skin, its edges alive, pulsing. I tried to fling it away, but it stuck, pressing closer, hungrier. Mara screamed, clawing at it, but the mask was fusing, its edges sinking into my flesh. My vision blurred, the whispers roaring in my skull, thousands of voices crying out in unison. Wear it! Wear it! Wear it! No! I bellowed, slamming my head against the altar. The mask cracked, splintering, and fell to the floor. I gasped, clutching my face. My skin burned where it had touched, raw and bleeding. Thomas tilted his head again. Stronger than I thought. Good. You'll need that strength for what comes next. The altar split with a deafening crack. Stone shards flew as a fissure yawned wide, revealing darkness so deep it seemed endless. From within, whispers surged, a tidal wave of voices screaming to be heard. And something moved in the dark. Something vast. Something waiting. Mara clung to me, her nails digging into my arm. We have to go. Now. But the fissure widened, the ground trembling. Hands clawed up from the dark, pale and thin, dragging bodies with them. Dozens, hundreds, faces hidden behind masks, the lost patients, the missing, the damned. They pulled themselves into the chapel, filling the pews, kneeling, in unison before the altar, and as they did, they began to chant, not words, not language, but a sound like the veil between worlds tearing. Thomas raised his arms, his voice carrying above the chant. The door is open. We ran, through halls that twisted, through stairs that shifted, through corridors that shouldn't exist. The asylum bent around us, reshaping itself, guiding us deeper instead of out. Behind us the chanting grew louder, filling every corner. The air thickened, pressing against our lungs, slowing our steps. At last, we stumbled into a chamber I had never seen before, and froze. The walls were covered in photographs, thousands of them, children, adults, families, all Ravenhurst, and in the center wall, me, every year of my life, every photograph ever taken, even moments I didn't remember, and beside them, Mara's and Thomas's, our entire lives documented, recorded, pinned like specimens. Mara sank to her knees, sobbing. They've always watched us, from the beginning. We never left. We never lived. I pulled her up, forcing myself to stay steady. Then we take our lives back. We end this. But even as I said it, I heard the truth in Thomas's voice echoing. In my skull, the door will never close. We finally found a staircase leading up, faint light spilling from above. We clawed toward it, desperate, dragging each other step by step. But when we reached the top, the door was already closing, and standing on the other side, hand on the handle, was Caldwell. His eyes were hollow, his face expressionless, and beneath, his arm, tucked close to his chest, was a mask. He met my gaze, lips curling into a smile that wasn't his. You were never meant to escape. Then the door slammed shut, and we were in darkness. Part 6. The Last Door Darkness. That was all that remained when Caldwell closed the door above us. A silence so thick, it felt like drowning. The air was damp, metallic, tasting of rust and earth. Mara clutched my hand in the dark, her nails digging deep. "They knew," she whispered, her voice breaking. "He knew all along." I didn't answer. Rage boiled in my chest, but beneath it was terror. Caldwell had been protecting something, not us. He had been part of it from the beginning, and now we were sealed inside. I lit a match. Its tiny flame flickered, revealing a corridor stretching ahead, the walls wet and breathing. Yes, breathing. The stone pulsed like flesh, each rise and fall matching the rhythm of something vast. We moved forward, the match burning low, until the corridor opened into another cavern. This one dwarfed the chapel above. In its center stood a door. Not wood, not metal. Something older. It pulsed like the walls, veins running through it, glowing faintly. Around it, masks hung suspended in midair, hundreds of them, swaying gently, as though in a breeze we couldn't feel. Mara gasped, covering her mouth. "What is this place?" I stepped closer, heart hammering. The door was alive, that much was clear, and it was waiting. Etched across its surface was a single word: home. The chanting began again, distant but growing closer. The masked congregation was descending. We didn't have long. "Mara," I said, grabbing her shoulders, "we have two choices. Run deeper and hope for another way out, or open it." Her eyes widened in horror. "Open it? Are you insane? You saw what they're trying to unleash." I hesitated. Maybe it's the only way to end it. Tears welled in her eyes. Or it's the end of everything. The chanting grew louder, echoing down the corridor. We didn't have time to decide. The high masks around us began to twitch, turning toward us. Though eyeless, they saw. I could feel their hollow gaze piercing me, whispering promises in voices I almost recognized. Family, friends, people long gone. Wear me and you'll never be alone again. Wear me and you'll never suffer again. Wear me and you'll belong. Mara clamped her hands over her ears, shaking her head violently. "Don't listen!" But the voices slithered deeper than ears. They coiled in the mind, in the marrow. One mask drifted closer, inches from my face. For a heartbeat, I saw my reflection in it, not as I was, but as I might have been. Happier, stronger, whole. It was so tempting. Then Mara slapped it aside, her voice ragged. "Fight it!" Her desperation broke the spell. I grabbed her hand, forcing myself to focus. "We're ending this. Together." The door loomed before us, throbbing like a living heart. I pressed my hand to its surface. It was warm, too warm, like flesh. At my touch, the whispers surged, deafening, 1,000 voices crying, "Open! Open! Open!" The surface rippled. A seam appeared, faint, but growing. The door was responding. Mara screamed. "Stop! You don't know what's behind it." Her voice cracked through my haze. I pulled my hand back, gasping. The chanting was nearly upon us now. Shadows filled the cavern entrance, rows of masked figures advancing. At their front, Caldwell and Thomas, side by side, masks gleaming. Thomas's voice echoed, layered and inhuman. "Brother, sister, come home." Mara shook her head, tears streaming. "No, no," Caldwell's voice followed, calm, inevitable. "You were always meant to stand here. This is the last door. The town was built to feed it. Every life, every death, every whisper. And now it waits for you." He extended his hand, the mask under his arm glowing faintly. "One choice. Wear it or open it. Either way, you're part of it." The cavern trembled. The masks circling the door rattled like chains. The fissure in the surface widened, spilling a black light that wasn't light at all. I turned to Mara. Her face was pale, streaked with tears, but her eyes blazed with defiance. "No," she whispered. "I won't be theirs." Before I could stop her, She grabbed a fallen shard of stone and drove it into her own arm. Blood spilled across the floor, soaking into the veins of the door. The cavern roared. The masks screamed. The chanting faltered. Thomas staggered back, his mask cracking. "What have you done?" Mara's face twisted in pain, but her voice was steady. "If the door wants blood, it gets mine, but it won't have us both." The veins of the door pulsed violently, the word home glowing brighter, brighter, until it seared my eyes, and then it opened. Darkness poured out, not absence of light, but a substance, thick and alive. It crawled across the floor, up the walls, over the masks. The figures in the cavern shrieked as it touched them, their bodies dissolving into the black. Thomas screamed, his mask shattering, his face pale and hollow beneath. Caldwell dropped to his knees, the mask slipping from his hands as the dark consumed him, and from the door something stepped through. Not human, not describable, a shape that shifted with every heartbeat, faces, limbs, wings, void, all masks and no face. It filled the cavern, towering, endless, and in its many voices, it spoke. "You are mine." The darkness surged toward us. I grabbed Mara, pulling her close, but the tide was unstoppable. Her blood still ran into the veins of the door, binding her, binding me. We screamed, and the world went black. When I opened my eyes, I was standing in Ravenhurst. The fog was gone. The sun was shining. Children played in the streets. The town was alive, bustling, ordinary. Mara stood beside me, her wound gone. She smiled, her eyes clear, as though nothing had happened. For a moment, I believed it was over. Then I saw them. Masks. Not on faces, on shadows. Every person's shadow wore one. Hollow-eyed, grinning. I spun, heart racing. Mara's shadow too, and mine. The whispers returned, soft, satisfied. The door is open, home at last. And when I looked down, the mask was back, in my hand.